Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the aftermath, the Timberwolves' unbelievable loss to the Detroit Pistons on Saturday night. I want to break down, take a half step back. Where are we right now? What happens next? Is Chris Finch's job really in jeopardy? Like, where do we go from here? A couple notes, kind of left over from the Pistons game specifically, and then looking ahead to Wolves Nuggets on Monday night. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy New Year, and happy Timberwolves game day. The Wolves take on the Denver Nuggets, continuing this four-game homestand at Target Center. We'll break that down a little later in the show. A big thank you here off the top, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today, again, on Roku or Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at my account, which is at Beecken, and that's with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right, so the Timberwolves have lost 6 straight at this point. Saturday was a new low. Friday, on Friday's Locked On Wolves episode, I previewed the weekend. I talked about Friday night in Milwaukee being a difficult game, but, at the time of the recording, we didn't know Rudy Gobert wouldn't play due to illness. It was a game that I thought the Wolves could compete in, and I was worried that if they, which is, I guess, indicative of being somebody that has followed the Timberwolves forever, and also this team specifically this year, really at any point through the franchise history, that I was already worried about, if the Wolves pull off this upset Friday, they'll lose Saturday to the Pistons. Like, that was kind of what I was worried about, because I thought the Pistons matchup was a little bit tricky because they have some offensive upside as a team. Well, as it turns out, the Wolves played well enough to win in Milwaukee with the double-digit halftime lead, but Giannis takes over. The Wolves down the stretch can't do what they need to do, have a lot of issues with technicals, flagrant fouls, delay of games, all that stuff adding up. And they have this disappointing loss to Milwaukee on Friday. And that's in the wake of Wednesday when they played well against New Orleans and had a disappointing loss to a good team. That game was even more impacted by some of those free points they gave New Orleans. And so Wednesday and Friday, like, okay, fine. It's fine. Like, they played well, both of those games. And I said as much on the live postcast on Friday night. And then on Saturday, they're up 14 at halftime against the Pistons after a buzzer beater at the end of the second quarter by Kyle Anderson. And then they have those third quarter issues crop up, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And they fall behind double digits to the team with the worst record in the league coming into the game with just 9 wins. Detroit did. Target Center's booing, the whole thing. It all completely falls apart. They didn't even get the win on Friday in order to fall flat Saturday in the wake of the win on Friday on the second half of the back-to-back. They lost both games, and both in disappointing fashion. But of course, Saturday was more upsetting. And Marty Gellner and I talked about this on the live postcast Saturday, just kind of the vibe around the team. But I want to take a half step back and talk about it more broadly. I mean, there were some post-game comments from Naz Reid, from Chris Finch, that I want to get into from Saturday. I thought the quote from Naz was most eye-opening, and I don't really know what to make of it. So I'm just going to read it. This is a question that Britt Robson of MinPost asked, and this was put out there on Twitter by both Dane Moore of the NBA, the Dane Moore NBA podcast, does a great job covering the Wolves, and then also John Krasinski of The Athletic. So this quote. Naz was asked if it was a mystery why the team was underachieving. Again, the question from Britt Robson, and Naz says, "Not really. We know why, and I'm going to kind of keep that in house, but we know why." That's why I said before, I feel like we can change this. We know we can change it. So we just got to buy into the things that we know. End quote. Also, after the game, the locker room was shut for about 45 minutes in what sounds like it was a team meeting. I don't know if it was players only or coaches were involved or not. It was kind of reported both ways. So these comments are after that. Like, if I wasn't following the team and I saw a player say that, my first reaction is coaching, right? Um, However, I don't know. Like, I don't know what he's talking about. I don't think anybody does specifically. It's not, nobody that is on the beat for the Wolves, or there's no there's no inside info that's out there that's public that suggests what this might actually be. If I didn't follow the Wolves at all and I saw this quote, if I was podcasting for like the Wizards or something random, I'd see this and I go, oh man, these players are quitting on the coach, right? I don't know that that's it for a couple of reasons. One, because I think Chris Finch is still a really good coach. Obviously, there's been a ton of issues this year. And if effort is the biggest issue, which I think it has been, a lot of times it can go back to the coach. But nobody's really suggesting that that's actually what the problem is. And to a man, players have always kind of said that, talked positively of Chris Finch and that he just got an extension in the spring. And Tim Connolly has talked about him as one of the best coaches he's ever been around. Like, I don't think it's specifically Chris Finch, although we have to start having that conversation when a team is underachieving like they are. And also the old saying, it's easier to get rid of the coach than it is to get rid of all of the players. So I don't know what Naz is referencing. Now, I think the most likely thing is it's not like a player or a coach or a person specifically. I think it's more an attitude or an issue that keeps being the biggest issue, right? So like the easiest X's and O's thing would be rebounding. Chris Finch talked about this extensively after the Friday loss in Milwaukee. The Wolves were a minus 20 whatever on the glass. But the same thing happened Saturday. Like if it's against a much, much, much worse team in the Detroit Pistons, the rebounding effort was simply non-existent. So is it that specifically? Is it a combination of the rebounding / effort and then players who embody that the most? That's where my money is. And to me, it's D'Angelo Russell. And certainly, I'm not saying the reason the Wolves are 16-21 is because of D'Angelo Russell. Obviously, there's a whole pile of things. And we talked about all of them, I think, on the show. But if I had to boil this down, it feels like a comment like that is aimed at, I mean, look at, like, I would have said this before the Pistons game, but D'Lo had 0 rebounds in that game on Saturday. In what did he play? 31 minutes. I'm going to pull up the box score here, but I think he had 0 rebounds in like 31 minutes, which obviously can't happen, right? And it's a bit of it's certainly a pattern for D'Lo. If you look at his numbers in general, he's way down across the board in terms of certain stats and up in certain others. 34 minutes, 0 rebounds for D'Angelo Russell in a game where the Wolves were out-rebounded as a team by 13 by the Detroit Pistons and gave up 15 offensive rebounds, a ton of them towards the end of the game as Detroit was pulling away. But back to D'Lo. D'Lo's scoring isn't down significantly. In fact, his shooting percentages are up a little bit. I'm talking about the season overall, but you look at his rebound rate. He currently has the lowest rebound rate, actually second lowest of his career, next to 2 years ago, which was the COVID shortened season when he had all the injuries, his first, quote unquote, full season in Minnesota. So they traded for him right before COVID shut everything down. He played a dozen games for the Wolves. The following year, he only played 42 games because it was a 72 game season and he was hurt a bunch. Throw that season out. This is the lowest rebound rate of his career. It is, bar none, the lowest defensive rebound rate of D'Lo's career. His highest turnover rate since the season before he became an all-star with Brooklyn. So going back 5+ seasons now, highest turnover rate since then. His lowest assist rate since the season before that, since his Lakers years, back when he was 20 years old, the lowest assist rate that D'Lo's had. And this in a year where the Wolves have more talent around D'Angelo Russell than he has ever played with. Not even close, right? Obviously, Karl-Anthony Towns is hurt now, but Towns, Ant, Rudy Gobert, even Jaden McDaniels, like, there's so much talent on this team. And now D'Lo's got his highest turnover rate in 5 years, his lowest assist rate in 6 years, his worst defensive rebound rate ever. And I know that I'm spending however many minutes I'm spending on D'Lo specifically. And I want to be clear, he isn't the reason why they're 16-21. But he kind of embodies all of these issues. They've got a bunch of guys that are, seems like, looking out for themselves mostly, not doing things that are going to help the team, like rebounding or passing. Like we could point to the fourth quarter. We will talk about this. Both Ant and D'Lo struggling to make shots in the fourth quarter, but both deciding, hey, it's up to me to do this, which is great, except for when you're playing in isolation every time down the floor, jacking a three with 20 seconds on the shot clock, down 5 with 2 minutes left, or whatever it was D'Lo did on Saturday. But like, I think D'Lo's season to this point is indicative of the larger problem. It's really, like I said a minute ago, an embodiment of some of these issues: lack of rebounding, lack of passing, turnover issues. But you take a step back, you look at his individual numbers, you say, actually, D'Lo's playing better now than he did, like, say, this year in Golden State, right? Defensively, he's better than he was a couple years ago, but he's still worse than he was last year. Like, he's not the earnest effort from D'Lo isn't to where it was last season with the Wolves. And especially in the last couple weeks, like it's been kind of valleys and peaks, or a couple of valleys and a peak when it comes to D'Lo. He was awful to start the year in terms of effort. All around wasn't great. He had 3-4 weeks in there right before and right after the cat injury where it seemed like D'Lo was, like we talked about, like, okay, this is what the Wolves want out of D'Lo. Like, he's doing exactly what they need him to do. And now he's way back down to where it's like, man, what would this team look like with a different point guard? And we saw how good they've been with Jordan McLaughlin on the floor. And of course, now J-Mac's been hurt. He's only played 3 games in the last, 5 weeks or so. But how much better the team has been with Jordan McLaughlin on the floor, a true point guard who's going to share the ball, and he'll get his when the ball comes around. Obviously, he's a very different player than D'Angelo Russell, but that's kind of the point, right? I don't want to get into this too much now, but, well, actually, no. Let's talk about it. I want to talk a little bit about a potential, like the idea of a trade with D'Angelo Russell. And this is a topic, a much bigger conversation, but I want to talk about it here in a minute, because there was this rumor on the Bill Simmons podcast, not a rumor, a proposed trade that I think is a really interesting idea. I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of it. I don't want to turn this into a, well, the Wolves trade D'Lo, or what could they get for D'Lo conversation yet. Like, we'll get there. But I want to touch on this because I think it's fascinating. So before we do that, though, well, I want to do that, and then I also want to talk Wolves Pistons, specifically a couple of issues, and then we'll get into the preview of Wolves Nuggets on Monday night. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Prize Picks. On Monday night against the Timberwolves, I would take Nikola Jokic over on rebounds. Whatever it is, take the over. Actually, pick almost any Nuggets player and pick the over on rebounds at Prize Picks, if I'm being honest about this matchup. If you're wondering how Prize Picks works, it's extremely easy. You just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, and it's not just points. Like I said, you can do rebounds, you can do assists, field goals made, three-pointers made. There's actually some kind of, not obscure, but different categories you can pick from. It's not just points. You can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport you watch. Of course, that includes the NBA as well as the NFL, college basketball, college football now with the end of bowl season. Really any sport. You can also mix sports when you submit your entry. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or easy. It really is that easy. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with our promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, for instance, they'll give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, let's keep this D'Lo conversation going for just a minute, because I just want to throw this out there and tease it for a future conversation, especially depending on how the rest of this week goes. Bill Simmons on the Bill Simmons podcast had Wosny Lambre on from The Ringer, and they talked a little bit of Wolves, and Simmons basically says, like, hey, I want to get an adult on Minnesota. Or actually, I think it might have been the other guy that said that. I think it might have been Wosny who said it. But Simmons proposes a 3-team deal, and like, I haven't run this through the trade machine. I'm sure he did. I shouldn't say that. He probably did. I'm sure it works. But basically, it's to get Kyle Lowry to Minnesota. Ultimately, Miami gets Van Vliet and Gary Trent Jr., and then Toronto gets D'Lo, Nikola Jovic from Miami, and Miami's first-round pick. So I don't know. From a Miami standpoint, I guess you get the upside of Gary Trent. Lowry's 30, whatever, 36, 37, 38 years old. I don't know, I guess, why Toronto would do this other than the pick. And I guess maybe they like Jovic. But for Minnesota, the point here is to get, as they call him, an adult in Kyle Lowry on the team. And there's something to be said for Kyle Lowry, the way he plays. He's a hard-nosed player. He's a good shooter. He's a vet. Like he's not Kyle Lowry from even 4 years ago, 3 years ago. We talked about this when the Wolves lost to the Heat a week ago. But I mean, he would be a better team player, a better addition to a team that's already got 3 stars in Towns, Gobert, and Edwards. And they mentioned something about, somebody says something about the window of D'Lo and the team. Like, that doesn't matter anymore. Like, D'Lo's a free agent anyway, right? That's the whole thing here is what's he going to get in free agency? He's obviously not going to get anything close to a max if he keeps playing the way he is now. Well, I mean, he wouldn't anyway, but like currently he's hurting his value. Even if the shooting percentages are up, like what's the team going to give D'Lo if they see him playing as selfishly as he has been playing? And I don't think it's outlandish to say that that's how he's been playing. So from a fit perspective, Kyle Lowry fits this team better than D'Angelo Russell. He needs the ball in his hands less. He can operate offense. He can knock down an open three. As of right now, in a vacuum, he's still a better player than D'Angelo Russell because he competes on both ends of the floor, because D'Angelo Russell's a smart player, but that's what makes it all that much more maddening when he plays the way that, like, say, he did on Saturday. Has a great first quarter, doesn't sniff a rebound all game, is bad defensively, awful down the stretch offensively, bad shot selection, all that stuff. Kyle Lowry, you're probably not going to get much of that at all from Lowry. So again, this is a bigger conversation, and I'd probably do a whole show on D'Lo possibilities and what should the Wolves do. You'd think D'Lo would be playing with some urgency this season, given that he is going to be a free agent, but that's not what we've gotten so far, at least not consistently from D'Lo. So I think the idea of a trade like that is fascinating. Kyle Lowry would be such a great fit in Minnesota. I don't think it's likely. I don't think that's something they could pull off. But at this point, like, D'Lo has to be on some level tradable because of the expiring deal. And, it's not like they have picks. You shouldn't have to attach a pick to an expiring deal anyway, but they don't have picks to trade, right? So it's basically like D'Lo, and then if you're willing to trade anybody else on the roster, but D'Lo is kind of the trade chip. Can you get anything for him? And if the Wolves could only give up D'Lo in this proposed trade from Simmons, if they only give up D'Lo and get back Kyle Lowry, absolutely you do that every day of the week. So anyway, that's a bigger conversation, something I want to get back to. Let's switch back real quickly to Wolves Pistons. Not that anybody really wants to relive it too much, but I wanted to hit a couple of key things. What went wrong? We talked about these with Marnie on the postcast on Saturday. But basically, the Wolves have a halftime lead that's double digits, and then the third quarter, they all the same third quarter issues have cropped up, getting beat on the glass as the game goes on. The Wolves go completely cold from the field in the fourth quarter. And D'Lo, after having a big first quarter, was he 1 for 6 in the fourth quarter. So was Anthony Edwards. They were both 1 for 6 in the fourth quarter. And it was basically ISO after ISO after ISO. And I mentioned earlier, D'Lo's pull-up 3 down 5 with just over 2 minutes to play. Like why? The shot selection. And again, I've been giving the Wolves player, especially Ant D'Lo, the benefit of the doubt in like, hey, they're not selfishly playing ISO ball. They just want to win. Well, if they want to win, then they're going to rebound, right? If you're going to win, you're going to go after loose balls. You're going to dive on the floor. You're going to have consistent effort defensively. Now, to credit Anthony Edwards, he had 10 boards on Friday against Milwaukee. He had 7 on Saturday against Detroit. And Ant's, 37-5 line was good. I mean, he played well overall. Ironically, D'Lo had the best plus minus on the team in this game in 34 minutes, and he shot 50% from the field, right? 25 points on 18 shots is okay. Only a couple turnovers, a +3. But the 0 rebounds, the bad defense, the transition, that's why you can't just look at the box score. Because if you didn't watch the game, you'd be like, D'Lo and Ant were good. They got 0 help in this game. Well, they were both awful in the fourth quarter on both ends of the floor, especially D'Lo on both ends of the floor, both bad offensively. D'Lo didn't get a single rebound in this game. Again, I can't say that enough. So, there was plenty to not like about D'Angelo Russell's game. And I thought, both of them tried to take matters into their own hands in the fourth quarter. And as we've seen throughout the year for the Wolves and really throughout time just in basketball in general, When the ball's moving, you're more likely to score. You can't just simply play isolation over and over and over and over again, unless you're Michael Jordan or, Kobe, basically, right? Like, I mean, like that's not a winning strategy for really any team in today's NBA. And D'Lo with these pull up threes, like those only make sense when he's hot, right? When he's like in the first quarter in this game, like that's a defensible shot. But with 2 minutes left, down 5, what are you doing? Move the ball, get more guys involved. Rudy Gobert had 3 shot attempts in this game, and part of that's on him. And Marty and I talked about this on the postcast on Saturday. The free throw rate for Rudy's way down this year because the Wolves just haven't found a way to get him the ball consistently. And with no Karl-Anthony Towns, like how is Rudy Gobert not more involved? And that goes back to the coaching, right? That's at least partially on Chris Finch and the coaching staff to not find a way to get Gobert the ball. And instead, he's playing the Jared Vanderbilt role. He's setting a screen, and then he's ended up in the dunker spot, and he's just kind of waiting to offensive rebound. It's like you're wasting Rudy Gobert if that's what you're doing. And D'Lo needs to find a way to be better at getting him the ball and pick and roll. Ant needs to, I think, has improved in that area, but needs to continue to get better. I don't know. Like those are the biggest things for me from this Pistons game. Also the rebounding. I talked about this, but the Wolves are minus 13 on the glass. They give up 15 offensive rebounds to Detroit, which is just horrific. Detroit led transition points, fast break points, 24-11 in this game. This is a team that's pretty middle of the pack in terms of pace. They're not a great defensive rebounding team, but yet the Wolves allowed them to run. Actually, a lot of it was after makes, right? They were pulling the ball out of the net, inbounding, getting down the floor. Marnie had the example in the show on Saturday, the Jalen Noel dunk. They come back and get an alley-oop layup on the other end. The Pistons do. Well, the Wolves were starting to get back, but still allow you, right? Like, there's always like one or two guys that are either still on the floor. Like Naz has been great. He's been one of the Wolves' best players this year, but falls down too much. Ant's complaining about a call, or D'Lo's complaining about a call, or even like Kyle Anderson has been kind of guilty of it. It's just a team-wide epidemic where these guys are complaining, or they're on the floor, or they're just lazy getting back, and teams are scoring after makes in transition against the Wolves, which is completely unacceptable. That to me was the biggest issue. That, and obviously the offensive rebounds, but a lot of those 15 came in that really short window in the fourth quarter when the Booz and Target Center kind of reached their apex. But the offensive rebound and the transition defense, going back to some of the same issues we've had all season that this team has had. So things that can't happen against the Denver Nuggets team on Monday night that isn't going to be an easy out, obviously. So I want to get into that matchup a bit, talk a little about the Denver matchup. We haven't seen them yet this year, weirdly enough. So I want to get into that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Built Bar. Looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, then you got to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays. I know my goal is to eat a little healthier this year. If you're like me, where you want to eat healthier but don't want to compromise taste, then I've got just the thing for you. You have to try Built. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious, you won't even think they're good for you. Perfect for your New Year's resolution. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're all covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. They come in unbelievably delicious flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I don't know how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they are healthy, only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait around to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. But now, this is brand new. You can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with their hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. You can thank me later. Again, Sam's Club or Walmart, grab a 13-bar box at Sam's with their hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. And then definitely thank me later for giving you the heads up on that. All right, Wolves take on the Nuggets on Monday night. As I'm recording this on Sunday before Denver plays, so Denver actually will be on a road back-to-back. Well, they're playing at home on Sunday, so they will be on the second night of a back-to-back after traveling. The Wolves, of course, have been home since Saturday. Denver has the Celtics in Denver on Sunday, so the Wolves will have a rest advantage. We don't know yet if Jamal Murray will play. He's been resting every now and again. He missed a game a few nights ago for Denver. He's questionable for Sunday's game, so they played on Friday, so maybe Denver rests Murray. I'm speculating. Maybe Denver rests Murray on Sunday, and then he plays against the Wolves Monday, or maybe it's the other way around. He plays Sunday and sits Monday. but I'd be surprised if he played in both games. So we don't know if Jamal Murray will play. This is kind of a sneaky winnable game for Minnesota, partly because of that, partly because of the back-to-back and the travel. And then also there's the what everything I've talked about so far in today's episode, which is this has to be rock bottom, right? So the Wolves have to come out, and they competed against good teams last week where they're kind of in this, raising or lowering themselves to the level of competition. Where just last week they played well. They played the Pelicans to the final possession. They played well for most of the game against Milwaukee, but then they lost to a severely shorthanded Miami team on the road. They lost to a bad Pistons team at home. So will they get up for a home game with a rest advantage against a potentially shorthanded Nuggets team if Jamal Murray does not play? Or even if he does, this is a sneaky winnable game for Minnesota. Now, part of the reason for that is Denver has been a bad defensive team so far this season. They are 26th, I believe, in defensive rating, 25th in defensive rating so far this season. They're a good defensive rebounding team, but that's kind of it. They don't have a ton of great perimeter defenders on this team. They don't generate a lot of turnovers. As a team, they don't play very fast, and so they're not wreaking havoc and getting out in transition like, say, last year's Timberwolves team, right? They just try and play solid. They allow offensive rebounds, and they've had some issues defensively. Again, not a ton of great individual defenders. Aaron Gordon's still a good defender. Bruce Brown is a good defender. They've got some guys that can be effective defensively, but as a team, collectively, they've struggled on that end of the floor. Now, this is also a 23-12 team entering play on Sunday, entering their game against Boston. So that means they've been great on offense. They're second in offensive rating so far this season. They're the absolute best three-point shooting team by percentage in the league. They're 39.4% as a team, but they're 26th in three-point rate. So they don't shoot a ton of threes, but when they do, they make them. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is shooting 47% from three so far this season, which is obviously nuts. I mean, he's a starter for them. Michael Porter Jr. is at 41%. Bones Highland is over 40%. Bruce Brown, Aaron Gordon are just a little under 40%. So this is an offense that's efficient, effective field goal percentage. They're second in the league. They're middle of the pack in terms of offensive rebounds. They actually don't get to the line all that much. It's pretty much Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray when he's healthy, and then obviously Jokic that get to the line for them. Nobody else is really doing that on a consistent basis. So it's all about trying to make their limited three-point attempts at least contest them, right? We said this about the Milwaukee game on Friday, and the Wolves did it for the first 2.5 quarters or so, and then were miserable the rest of the game, getting hands in Milwaukee. Milwaukee was shooting it was under 20% from three at halftime. I think they had 3 made threes in the first half. The Wolves need to do what they did in the first half against Milwaukee, against Denver. Make their three-point attempts, just challenge them, right? Make them think twice before they launch a three. Make them think about putting the ball on the floor and trying to get into the paint, because you'd rather have Denver doing that, a team that is kind of meh in terms of getting to the line a bunch. You have you'd rather run Kentavious Caldwell-Pope off the line, right? He doesn't get to the line a ton. He'd rather running him off the three-point line. He doesn't get to the free throw line a ton, but he's a 47% three-point shooter this year. Run him off the line, force him to put the ball on the floor, close out in a controlled manner. And that's number one for me in this game, is to try and slow them down offensively. Now, defensively, this is a team that isn't great at the point of attack. They end possessions. They don't give you a ton of second chance opportunities, so that is going to hurt Minnesota. But the Wolves should be able to get to the line a little bit against this team. If they move the ball, make them move their feet, try and make them defend in space, they should have an opportunity to score some points. Of course, everything centers around Nikola Jokic, and if Murray plays, he's been good. When he's played he's played most of the season. They're resting him in certain situations, but he's 36% from three, averaging 18 a game. He's their second leading scorer behind Jokic, but Jokic continues to just be phenomenal and nearly average a triple-double so far this season. So, do your best to not follow Jokic a ton. Without Towns, that makes that matchup obviously a bit more difficult. I'd be curious to see how the Wolves handle Jokic in this game. I mentioned this a minute ago. This is actually the first time the Wolves have seen Denver this season, but we'll now see them 4 times in the next month, basically. It's I think it's the next 5 weeks, through the second week of February, the Wolves will see the Denver Nuggets 4 times. And of course, there's a Tim Connolly parallel. There's, guys like Rivers and Bryn Forbes who were on the Nuggets as recently as last season. And then you have on the bench for Denver, assistant coaches David Adelman, former Timberwolves assistant, and Ryan Saunders joined the Nuggets this year after sitting last year out. Of course, the former Timberwolves head coach and longtime assistant in Minnesota. So you have Saunders and Adelman on their bench. You have Connolly in the Wolves front office. You have Of course, Finch was a former Nuggets assistant, now going back several years, but he did work with Jokic. And then you have Rivers and Forbes on the Wolves as well. So pretty interesting parallels here, and weird that we haven't seen them yet. So I think this is a sneaky winnable game for Minnesota. I'm not going to sit here and predict that the Wolves are going to win, because why would we at this point? But I think it could be a really competitive game. I think the Wolves will play well. And if they don't, hey, rock bottom just keeps getting lower, right? And moral victories, hey, we need real victories. Now, the week doesn't get any easier for the Wolves. They have a difficult week ahead of them. After the Denver game on Monday, they're back at it Wednesday. This Monday's game 2 of a 4-game homestand. And then Wednesday, you have Portland at home, which I guess is a little bit easier than Denver, theoretically, although the Wolves lost twice in Portland just a couple of weeks ago. And then the Clippers at home on Friday before a couple winnable road games, Houston and Detroit next week. Marnie and I talked about this. I guess it was off air on Saturday after the postcast, but the Wolves have to find a way to win at least one of these 3 games, and ideally 2. And it wouldn't shock me if the Wolves say beat Denver and Portland and then, maybe lose to the Clippers or something, because that's kind of what this team has done this year, is they've played to their competition. And perhaps this players only meeting, perhaps these public comments by Naz Reid and others can help the Wolves kind of get over whatever weird hump they have right now, and steal a win against Denver Monday, and then maybe win 1 or 2 against Portland and the Clippers before heading out for a couple of winnable road games next week. Then you find yourself close to 500, and perhaps then we get closer to getting Towns back and all that stuff as we get into mid-January. So all that to say, we'll do the live postcast following Monday night's game with Marnie on Bally Sports North. We do that about 45 minutes after the game, live on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube page. And the episode before this one, whatever audio platform you're listening to right now, you can find the postcast from Saturday when Marnie and I talked Wolves Pistons immediately following that game. We'll do the full post-game podcast. That'll be Tuesday's show, so that'll post early on Tuesday. Of course, daily Monday through Friday with postcasts following each game. So make sure you're following and subscribe to Locked On Wolves wherever you listen to podcasts. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. You can also watch on Locked On Sports Minnesota. That's a Roku and Amazon Fire TV app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now make your second listen the Game to Game NBA podcast. Every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.